recently spoken a little bit about the Maccabees. Of course, this holiday celebrating the triumph of the Maccabees, the miracle of the oil. Mr. Beinart, you have recently said that Maccabees refer to, and I quote, religious zealots who demand that Jews reject any interaction with foreign cultures. Whereas, Rabbi Boteach, you have defined the word Maccabee as a universal term connoting a courageous fighter for religious liberty and spiritual freedom. One word, two very different interpretations. Who'd like to start?
I'll start, sure. I love Hanukkah. When this is over, I'll go home and on FaceTime call my family and watch my kids light candles. The idea that at the darkest time of the year that we are called to try to bring light into the world, I think is an incredibly powerful and moving idea. The only point I was making about the Maccabees is that the Maccabees were fighting for national liberation. There's no question about that. And it was an inspiring fight. They were not fighting for religious freedom for all people, right? When Mattathias responds after refusing to give the pagan sacrifice himself by killing the Jew who gives the pagan sacrifice, and then going with his band and forcibly circumcising Jews who were not circumcised, that is not actually an act in support of religious freedom. Nonetheless, I think the Hanukkah story is an incredibly powerful story in our time because it's a Zionist story. It's the story of the creation of the last Jewish state before our own time. But it's also the story, if we continue forward a little bit, about the loss of that sovereignty. And what we know from our texts about the Hashmonaim and why they lost sovereignty, it was that it had to do with moral corruption. It had to do with the fact that they took control of both the high priestship and the kingship, which according to Jewish law you were not allowed to do. There was supposed to be a separation between religious and political authority. So for me, Hanukkah is an inspiring story about Jews creating a state and also a warning that ultimately the physical survival of this new Jewish state is also dependent on its ethics. And it's dependent in our time on its ability to hold fast to those beautiful words in its Declaration of Independence that talk about complete equality of social and political rights. Inside the Green Line, Israel does a remarkable, in many ways, inspiring job of doing that. In the West Bank, where the vast majority of people lack citizenship, live under military law, don't have the right for the government that controls their lives, Israel is not doing a very good job. And my worry is that that threatens the existence of this extraordinary Zionist experiment.
Rabbi Boteach, to allow you to speak about your definition of the Maccabees as courageous fighters for religious liberty and spiritual freedom.
Let me begin by thanking our hosts and sponsors this evening. I'm a great fan of Stand With Us and the work they do around the world. I'm a great fan of globes, and I want to thank my counterpart, Peter Beinart. Peter and I have actually known each other for more than 2 decades. He was a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford when I was the emissary of Rabbi and Rabbi to the Jewish students. He used to come to us for Shabbat dinner. We got along better then.
You used to feed me then.
Just goes to show you a little bit of vodka and whiskey can do. And these forums are so important, and they are facilitated, and this is my final thanks, by the modern Maccabees, the brave soldiers of the IDF who allowed democracy and freedom of speech to flourish within this great nation. I want to thank my daughter Hannah. I have a daughter sitting here somewhere in the front row who served in the IDF, who now lives here in Israel. We have a son who is currently serving in the IDF in the south, who has a kibush tomorrow. He got engaged last night. God bless him. A Maccabee is a fighter for the independence of his or her people. It has become a universally acknowledged term. Someone who believes that they have a right to live, to prosper, to survive, and to flourish. It's the reason why, for us Jews, a Maccabee is a proud honor. When Peter wrote his column this year, condemning the choice of the term campus Maccabees for those who he asked to fight BDS on campus, I was surprised. But then I shouldn't have been so surprised, because for Peter, the Maccabees were religious zealots and extremists who ultimately, he says, become corrupt and destroy the Jewish state. But that's in keeping with what he wrote about Purim, where he actually distorts the words of the Megillah itself. The Megillah says that after the Jews were threatened with a genocide from a country called Persia, very similar to Iran today, threatening genocidal intent against the Jewish state of Israel, that the Jews defended themselves and killed 75,000 who were trying to annihilate them. Peter removes the words defend themselves and says the Jews basically visited upon their enemies what their enemies wanted to do to them. Now, God bless Peter Beinart, this is such an important conversation. But I'm not surprised that Peter condemns the Maccabees or the story of Purim, because Peter loves Israel unless Israel wants to defend itself. According to Peter, in his book, The Crisis of Zionism, the greatest challenge to the Jewish people is not people being stabbed in marketplaces throughout Israel. It is not people being blown up on buses. It is not the fear that I saw in the eyes of my friends when we took them to a neighborhood in East Jerusalem last night for our son's engagement party. No, the great common drum of Israel, he says, is that we are the aggressor. We are too powerful. We have to be more concerned about our power, and he says that the American Jewish community parades its victimhood in a way that is unacceptable and is morally corrosive. My friends, do any of you feel that that is the primary challenge to Israel? Let me be clear about the threats facing Israel today and why we need more modern Maccabees, and why I praise the ancient Maccabees and the modern Maccabees. Iran, under Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, is threatening Israel with genocide on a near daily basis. Peter says it doesn't matter. I'm astonished at the columns that he's written where he says that Iran doesn't mean it, we shouldn't follow their words. He is well aware of the fact that there is a law voted on by most member states of the United Nations, the 1948 Genocide Convention, which makes genocidal incitement a crime. And Khamenei should be indicted by the International Criminal Court, by the ICC. I find it astonishing that he minimizes genocidal intent. Peter, when he looks at the genocidal charter of Hamas, he says, don't focus on the charter. Hamas has issued, quote, other documents of late. Does anyone see Hamas moderating? Not only vis-a-vis Israel's existence, did they see Hamas moderating vis-a-vis innocent Palestinian girls, women, whose only crime is to fall in love with someone who may not be sanctioned by their father or brother? Does anyone know here what Hamas government's punishment is for a young woman who falls in love with a Muslim Palestinian man? The crime for murdering your sister or daughter is 2 years, and it's almost never enforced. Or what happens? I have a gay Orthodox Jewish brother. The plight of gay men in Gaza. When we minimize the threats against the Jewish people, it's not the Jews who primarily suffer. It's our innocent Arab brothers and sisters, each and every one of whom was created equally in the image of God. Each and every one of whom deserve the same rights, freedom of conscience, freedom of speech, freedom of press that is denied our Palestinian brothers and sisters under the Palestinian Authority of Mahmoud Abbas and under Hamas. You'll find that Peter, I'll finish with this, Peter will always condemn Israel, as he just said. He had to answer the question of the Maccabees by condemning Israel for Judea and Samaria, the West Bank. Is there really a democracy in the Palestinian Authority? Why doesn't that bother you? Mahmoud Abbas was elected to a 4-year term. He hasn't gone to elections in 10 years. Does anyone consider Hamas a democratic government? Peter is not troubled by the absence of Palestinian democracy. He's troubled by his Jewish conscience. Well, Peter, you are a humanitarian. I respect you. But I'm sorry to tell you, Israel does not exist to make you feel better about yourself. It doesn't exist to make you have a clear conscience. It exists as the one and only Jewish state, and its first responsibility is to defend its citizens with the modern Maccabees as with the ancient Maccabees.
Let's give you some time to go through some of those points.
It's interesting, you notice I didn't mention Rabbi Boteach at all in my answer. I actually answered the question. Ad hominem attacks, I think, are beneath your dignity, and they're not the way that I choose to debate. Let me tell you what I believe. much of what the way that Rabbi Boteach described my point of view was unrecognizable to me. But I have many family members who are much more in accord with him than they are with me. I have many family members who would choose in an Israeli election between voting for Naftali Bennett and voting for Shas. So we are one community that has to be respectful and civil to one another across these political and ideological divides, and that's why I'm not going to respond by impugning your integrity or your support of the state of Israel. The reason I'm a Zionist is because when I was in high school, I saw a Jewish state send airplanes to pick up the Jews of Ethiopia, one of the poorest and most reviled communities on earth, and save their lives by returning them to be with the people from whom they had been estranged since the days when the temple stood. And I saw a man named Anatoly Sharansky. I saw in the news I saw the pictures of him come down the tarmac after 9 years in a Soviet gulag and be greeted by the entire Israeli cabinet. And it seemed to me very obvious, even as a young person, that we needed one country in the world that was dedicated to Jewish self-protection, that had Jewish self-protection as its mission statement, and that the light from that Jewish community, the extraordinary things that the state of Israel could produce, could enrich and enliven the entire Jewish world as Achad Ha'am envisioned, and indeed the entire world. But I also believe that what made Israel, and still believe, so precious, was that in 1947, in the shadow of the Holocaust, in a war against all of its neighbors, fielding a ragtag army composed in significant measure of people with numbers tattooed on their arms, the founders of this country were a declaration of independence that promised that they would pursue freedom, justice, and peace as envisaged by the Hebrew prophets, and strive to guarantee complete equality of social and political rights irrespective of race, religion, and sex. To me, that is at the heart of the Zionist miracle. And Israel, when it took over the territory in the West Bank, against David Ben-Gurion's fervent arguments that this was a terrible path for Israel to take, Israel turned away from that extraordinary democratic project that it had created, where Israel gave citizenship to the Palestinians remaining inside Israel, even when they were not given citizenship in Syria and Lebanon, to which they had fled. And that, I believe, is a threat to the security of the state of Israel, because democracy is at the core of our ability to defend the state of Israel. And if you don't believe me, maybe you might believe Carmi Gilon, former head of the Shin Bet, who said, Israel's policies in the West Bank are making the lives of millions unbearable. Or you believe Abraham Shalom, who was head of the Shin Bet as well, who said in the West Bank we've become a brutal occupation force. Or you believe Yuval Diskin, who was head of the Shin Bet, who said that in the West Bank we are acting like a colonial regime. Or you believe Edwin Omer, who said, if the day comes when the two-state solution collapses and we face a South Africa-style struggle for equal voting rights, the state of Israel is finished. Or you believe Ehud Barak, who said, if this block of millions of Palestinians cannot vote, then we will be an apartheid state. Those are not my words. I don't use those words. Those are Ehud Barak's words. To defend, it is a threat to Israeli security, to continue to pay people to move from democratic Israel across the Green Line into non-democratic Israel. That is a threat to Israel's survival, because it makes it so much easier for those people who don't want Israel to exist to say that Zionism and democracy are incompatible, to say that Israel is an apartheid state, to say that it's fundamentally a racist enterprise. To defeat them, we have to struggle for Israeli democracy. That's why I write what I do.
Israel as a Jewish democratic state, and he said, oh, maybe we won't ask those, it's kind of overplayed, but I guess we're still thinking about it. Maybe we'll move on.
Personally, I want to know what you guys talked about Shabbos dinner 20 years ago, because that sounds, anything like this would have been a passionate dinner.